At the dawn of the 20th century, Ireland stood at a crossroads. The legacy of centuries of English and later British rule weighed heavily on the island, shaping its political institutions, social fabric, and the aspirations of its people. Yet beneath the surface of a society still formally united with the United Kingdom, currents of change were stirring, currents that, over the coming decades, would transform Ireland into a nation marked by both independence and division. To understand the social change that swept through modern Ireland, it is necessary to picture life as it was around 1900. Ireland was then a society in transition. The scars of the Great Famine lingered, having fundamentally altered demographics and land ownership, while memories of the 19th century struggles for Catholic emancipation and tenant rights remained vivid. The country was part of the United Kingdom, and its governance was directed from Westminster, though agitation for autonomy, the so-called Home Rule movement, had grown ever more prominent through the latter half of the 19th century. The old political order was giving way, and a new sense of national identity was beginning to take root, shaped by a blend of cultural revival, political activism, and social aspiration. The late 1800s and early 1900s witnessed what has often been called the Irish cultural revival, a flowering of interest in native Irish language, literature, and sport, led by figures who saw cultural renewal as essential for political independence. Organizations such as the Gaelic League and the Gaelic Athletic Association played key roles in promoting Irish traditions. These movements nurtured a generation of thinkers, writers, and activists, and their influence reached not only city drawing rooms, but also rural communities, where the Irish language and customs had persisted despite Anglicization. The sense of a distinctive Irish culture, separate from the English, provided fertile ground for the new nationalism that would soon alter the country's political trajectory. Yet, for all its cultural vibrancy, Ireland at the turn of the century remained largely rural and agrarian. The social structure was defined by land ownership, with many small farmers, agricultural laborers, and tenant farmers living in conditions that ranged from modest to precarious. Land reform had been a major issue throughout the 19th century, and while some progress had been made, questions of rural poverty and security persisted. In the cities, especially Dublin, social divisions were stark, with pockets of wealth existing alongside tenements marked by poverty and overcrowding. Against this backdrop, political change was gathering momentum. The Home Rule movement, which sought limited self-government within the United Kingdom, had become the main focus of constitutional nationalism. While Home Rule bills came before the British Parliament several times in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, they were repeatedly delayed or blocked, often fueling frustration and radicalization among nationalists. The Irish Parliamentary Party, the dominant nationalist force at Westminster, advocated for peaceful constitutional change, but their efforts were increasingly challenged by more militant voices. The rise of the Irish Republican Brotherhood, a secret revolutionary organization, signaled a turn toward the possibility of armed struggle. The Brotherhood, and others like them, drew inspiration from both the failures of constitutional reform and a long tradition of resistance to British rule. The militarization of Irish politics, as some historians have observed, grew out of impatience with the pace of change and a conviction that independence would not be granted voluntarily by the British government. Social divisions in Ireland were not only a matter of class or rural-urban distinction. Religion and identity loomed large, particularly in the north. The Protestant communities in Ulster, many descended from settlers brought over in previous centuries, were generally unionist, committed to maintaining the union with Britain. In contrast, the Catholic majority in the rest of Ireland gravitated toward nationalism. This division would have profound consequences as the 20th century unfolded. The outbreak of the First World War in 1914 interrupted, but did not halt, the march toward Irish self-determination. The war years saw the suspension of the latest Home Rule Act, and the issue of Irish autonomy was put aside as the Irish and British governments focused on the war effort. However, the Easter Rising of 1916, a brief but dramatic armed insurrection by Irish Republicans, brought the question of independence back to the forefront. The rising was suppressed, but its leaders were executed, an act that deeply affected Irish public opinion and accelerated the shift from constitutional nationalism to republicanism. After the war, Ireland entered a new and turbulent phase. The years 1919 to 1921 saw the Irish War of Independence, a guerrilla conflict between Irish Republican forces organized largely by the Irish Republican Army and British forces. This period was marked by ambushes, reprisals, and a growing sense of crisis on both sides. The war was the culmination of a centuries-long struggle, as historians often put it, but it was also shaped by the specific conditions of the time, the global context of anti-colonial movements, the influence of the Irish diaspora, and the failures of political reform. Leadership during the War of Independence came from a new generation of nationalists, many connected to Sinn Féin, the party that had declared an independent Irish republic in 1919. The war took a heavy toll with casualties on both sides and widespread disruption. Mass resignations from the Royal Irish Constabulary, the Irish police force, reflected both the intensity of Republican agitation and the breakdown of British authority in many areas. The war ended in 1921 with the Anglo-Irish Treaty, a document that would both fulfill and fracture the aspirations of Irish nationalists. Under the treaty, most of Ireland became the Irish Free State, a self-governing dominion within the British Commonwealth, while 6 counties in the north, where Unionist sentiment was strongest, remained part of the United Kingdom as Northern Ireland. Thus, the partition of Ireland came into being, formalizing a division that had deep historical roots in religious, cultural, and political identity. The creation of the Irish Free State in 1922 marked a turning point. For the first time in centuries, most of the island had a measure of self-government, yet independence came at a cost. The treaty split the nationalist movement, leading to the Irish Civil War, a bitter conflict between pro- and anti-treaty forces. The legacy of this division would shape Irish politics for generations. Socially, the early years of the Free State were marked by both continuity and change. The new government grappled with the need to establish order and legitimacy, and there was a pronounced emphasis on values such as respectability, order, and morality. Many of those who shaped the new state were influenced by the ideals of the Irish Revolution, which placed importance not just on political independence, but also on creating a society that reflected Irish traditions and Catholic morality. This was evident in legislation and in the tone of public discourse, as the new state sought to distinguish itself from its colonial past. In the north, the situation was very different. The creation of Northern Ireland formalized the political and cultural division between North and South. Protestant Unionists dominated the new statelet, and relations between Catholic and Protestant communities remained tense. The legacy of earlier settlement patterns, particularly the plantations of Ulster, continued to influence social and political life. Partition entrenched identities and created a border that, for many, symbolized both loss and hope. Despite the dramatic events of these years, life for most Irish people changed only gradually. The economy remained predominantly agricultural, and immigration continued to shape family life and demography. Social structures rooted in land ownership and kinship endured, even as new opportunities and challenges emerged. The early decades of independence also saw efforts to build national institutions and promote Irish identity. Schools, for example, were encouraged to teach the Irish language, and the state supported cultural organizations that celebrated Irish history, literature, and sport. Yet these efforts unfolded against a backdrop of economic hardship and social conservatism, and the tensions between tradition and modernity were never far from the surface. Access to primary sources, such as government records, newspapers, diaries, and letters, reveals the complexities of Irish social life during this period. These materials show a society negotiating its new status, balancing the demands of state building with the desires and anxieties of ordinary people. Questions of class and gender, as well as religion and politics, shape debates about the future. The story of Ireland in the 20th century, then, is not simply one of revolution or rupture. It is a story of gradual transformation, punctuated by moments of crisis and compromise. The foundations of modern Irish society were laid in these years, in the interplay of old and new, tradition and innovation, conflict and reconciliation. The emergence of an independent Irish state and the simultaneous creation of Northern Ireland set the stage for the social changes that would follow. Changes that would touch every aspect of Irish life, from family and religion to politics and culture. As the century advanced, Ireland would continue to grapple with the meaning of independence, the challenge of partition, and the ongoing quest for social justice and economic security. But at the dawn of the 20th century, the foundations were being laid for a new nation, one marked by both the burdens of history and the promise of change. In the decades following the Second World War, sweeping changes transformed Ireland, reshaping its society, culture, and economy in ways that would have been hard to imagine in the early years of independence. For much of the 20th century, daily life for many Irish people remained anchored to old certainties, the rhythms of rural existence, the authority of the Catholic Church, and the expectation that emigration, rather than opportunity at home, would offer a better life. Yet as the century progressed, powerful forces began to erode these foundations, setting Ireland on a new path. The character of the Irish state after independence was, by all accounts, deeply conservative. The society that emerged in the 1920s was rural, cautious, and Catholic, with the church's teachings woven into every aspect of public and private life. Family life, education, and even marriage bore the unmistakable stamp of religious authority. The Catholic Church's influence was so pervasive that its moral teachings shaped laws and social norms, affecting everything from school curricula to the boundaries of acceptable behavior at home and in the community. For decades, this created a society that, while stable, was also insular and resistant to change. Yet beneath this surface, pressures were mounting. The Irish population continued to decline well into the mid-20th century, driven by persistent emigration. Young people, seeing few prospects at home, left in large numbers for Britain, America, and beyond. This exodus did more than drain the countryside of its youth. It also brought back new ideas, new attitudes, and a growing sense that Ireland could not remain unchanged forever. Economically, the country reached a low point in the mid-1950s. There were widespread doubts about whether the Irish economy could ever be truly viable. Limited industrial development meant that manufacturing jobs were scarce, and the country's reliance on agriculture left it vulnerable to the uncertainties of international markets. The lack of opportunity at home fueled the cycle of emigration and reinforced a sense of stagnation. By the late 1950s and early 1960s, however, the first real signs of change began to emerge. New economic policies aimed to open Ireland to the world, attracting foreign investment and encouraging the growth of new industries. While industrialization was modest at first, it marked a decisive break from the inward-looking policies of earlier decades. The expansion of the service sector in particular created new opportunities, especially for women, whose roles in Irish society would change dramatically in the years to come. These economic shifts were felt beyond the workplace. As opportunities for education and employment expanded, family life began to evolve as well. Women, long confined to traditional roles within the home and excluded from public life, started to enter the workforce in increasing numbers. This transformation was gradual but unmistakable. By the late 20th century, Irish women were achieving higher levels of education and participating more fully in economic and public life. Their growing visibility and independence challenged long-standing gender norms and altered expectations around marriage, family, and work. These changes were not without tension. For generations, the ideal of Irish womanhood had been shaped by religious expectations and social convention, emphasizing chastity, obedience, and motherhood. Those who stepped outside these boundaries risked social censure and, in some cases, exclusion. Yet as more women pursued education and careers, attitudes shifted. The reality of women balancing work and family became increasingly common, and new conversations emerged about rights, equality, and the place of women in Irish society. Research highlights that these shifts had profound effects on family life and attitudes, moving the country away from patterns of sexual repression and second-class citizenship for women that had prevailed for much of the 20th century. Education, too, became a battleground for change. For many years, the Catholic Church held a powerful role in shaping Irish educational policy, with religious values guiding the curriculum and the organization of schools. However, from the 1940s onward, the state began to take a more active role in reforming education, seeking to balance tradition with the need for a modern workforce. The removal of secondary school tuition fees in 1967 was a particularly significant step, opening up educational opportunities to a broader segment of the population and helping to break down barriers to social mobility. The movement toward comprehensive education and debates about the role of the Irish language in schools reflected broader struggles over identity and the direction of cultural change. Despite these reforms, persistent inequality and the slow pace of change in some areas remained sources of frustration for many. Yet there is little doubt that the education system played a crucial role in preparing the country for the challenges and opportunities of a more open, globalized economy. As more young people gained access to higher levels of education, they brought with them new ideas and expectations, further fueling the winds of transformation. Perhaps the most striking change, however, occurred in the realm of religion. For much of the 20th century, the Catholic Church stood as the most powerful institution in Irish life. Weekly mass attendance was the norm, religious festivals marked the calendar, and priests wielded enormous influence, not just in the confessional, but in schools, hospitals, and even politics. Yet, within a single generation, this dominance began to wane. The decline in church attendance was dramatic. In 1990, approximately 81% of Irish people attended Mass weekly. Within a few decades, that figure had dropped to around 35%. While the reasons for this shift are complex, the impact of high-profile scandals involving clerical abuse and the legacy of mother and baby homes cannot be overstated. These revelations shattered public trust in the church and forced the country to confront painful truths about the darker side of its past. As the authority of the church diminished, so too did the grip of cultural Catholicism, a set of values and practices that had once shaped everything from politics to personal morality. In the wake of these changes, Ireland did not become wholly secular. Instead, the country entered a new phase, sometimes described as post-Catholic, in which religion continued to matter but was no longer the defining force in public life. This shift brought both liberation and uncertainty. On one hand, it allowed for more open discussion of issues like divorce, contraception, and same-sex relationships, topics that had been taboo for generations. On the other, it forced many to renegotiate questions of identity and belonging that had previously been taken for granted. Economic growth played a role in accelerating these changes. The so-called Celtic Tiger period, marked by rapid expansion and rising prosperity, brought a new sense of confidence and cosmopolitanism. Ireland's cities, in particular, became more diverse, energetic, and outward-looking. Urbanization gathered pace, drawing people from rural areas into towns and cities in search of work and opportunity. This urban shift altered the patterns of daily life, weakening the traditional ties of family and parish that had long defined Irish society. Yet, amidst all this change, traditions endured. Folk culture remained vibrant, with music, sport, and storytelling continuing to knit communities together. The GAA, for instance, retained its central role in local and national life, while Irish music and dance found new audiences both at home and abroad. The persistence of family as a core value, even as its forms evolved, testified to the deep roots of Irish social life. Migration, both emigration and the arrival of newcomers, infused Irish culture with fresh perspectives, even as it raised questions about what it meant to be Irish in a changing world. The evolution of Irish culture was, in many ways, a story of negotiation between past and present. Christianity retained an important place in national identity even as its institutional power waned. Elements of Gaelic and British influence continued to shape everything from language policy to sporting preferences. The status of the Irish language, for example, remained a topic of debate in education and public life, reflecting the ongoing tug-of-war between tradition and modernity. Through it all, the Irish experience was marked by resilience and adaptability. The country's transformation was neither smooth nor uniform. Economic setbacks, such as the recession of the 1980s, brought renewed hardship and challenged the optimism of previous decades. Social and political attitudes shifted in response to these ups and downs as people weighed the promises and pitfalls of modernization. Yet the broad arc of change was unmistakable. Ireland moved from a society defined by deference, tradition, and exclusion toward one that was more open, diverse, and dynamic. Looking back from the vantage point of the 21st century, it is clear that the winds of transformation that swept Ireland in the latter half of the 20th century did not simply dismantle old structures. They also created new possibilities. The echoes of a conservative, rural, and Catholic society linger, but they are joined by the voices of a new generation, confident in their ability to shape their own futures and to find meaning in a world that is, in many ways, radically different from that of their grandparents. In the end, the story of social change in modern Ireland is one of both loss and renewal. Old certainties have faded, but in their place has come a society that is, for all its challenges, more inclusive and more attuned to the complexities of modern life. The transformation has been profound, touching every aspect of Irish existence, from the family hearth to the national conversation, leaving behind a country that is, in the words of many observers, changed utterly, yet still recognizably itself. If you had walked the streets of Dublin or Cork in the closing years of the 20th century, you might have sensed a society in transition, one foot still planted in the old rhythms, the other stepping tentatively towards something new. Yet it is only in the past few decades that the full force of this transformation has become visible, reshaping not just city skylines and fields, but also the very fabric of Irish identity. Today's Ireland is a place of remarkable diversity, evolving attitudes and new challenges, where questions of belonging and identity are being asked with fresh urgency. The clearest marker of change is diversity itself, reflected in the latest census figures and visible in the faces and languages heard across Ireland's towns and cities. According to the 2022 Census of Population, roughly 12% of Ireland's population are now non-Irish citizens, a figure that would have been almost unimaginable in the past. The largest groups among these newcomers include people from India, Romania, and Brazil. Migration to Ireland, once a trickle, has become a steady current. The reasons for coming are varied. Some seek economic opportunity, others escape hardship, and many are drawn by Ireland's reputation for tolerance and opportunity. These new communities have brought their own traditions, religions, and aspirations, enriching the social landscape in ways both subtle and profound. This pattern of migration sets modern Ireland apart from its neighbor, the United Kingdom, which has a longer history of multiculturalism. Yet Ireland's transformation into a multi-ethnic, multi-religious society has been rapid, intense, and, by many accounts, is still ongoing. Where once the public imagination associated Irishness with a narrow set of cultural and religious markers, today there is an ongoing negotiation over what it means to belong. In schools, workplaces, and neighborhoods, people from different backgrounds are learning to live together, sometimes awkwardly, but often with curiosity and goodwill. Attitudes toward diversity have shifted as well. Surveys indicate that nearly 3/4 of adults believe that Catholic culture adds to Ireland's richness and diversity, suggesting a society that values its religious heritage even as it opens itself to new influences. This is not to say the path has been without friction. Global events, economic uncertainty, and the challenge of integrating new arrivals have tested Ireland's institutions and sense of community. Recent years have seen sharp changes in net immigration, with numbers rising and falling in response to international crises and government policies. Yet the overall direction is clear. Ireland is more open to the world than ever before. This openness has not always come easily. The expansion of diversity has prompted soul-searching about the boundaries of Irishness. For much of the 20th century, a unitary notion of identity prevailed, rooted in shared ancestry, language, and faith. Now, debates over identity have become a fixture of public life. Scholars note a shift from that older, more exclusive understanding towards something more pluralistic, with room for different religions, languages, and histories. The question of who gets to call themselves Irish is no longer settled by birth or blood alone, but is shaped by experience, contribution, and belonging. The emergence of this new pluralism is evident not only in the census but in popular culture, politics, and even sport, where the composition of local teams and audiences reflects the changing face of the nation. The transformation of Irish society is not solely about migration. The past few decades have also seen a dramatic rethinking of attitudes toward marriage, sexuality, and personal autonomy. For generations, Irish law and custom were anchored in conservative norms, enforced both formally and through powerful social expectations. The late legalization of divorce in 1995 is a stark reminder of how recently some of these barriers fell. Even after divorce became legal, traditional ideas about marriage and respectability lingered, shaping both public debate and private choices. Yet change has come, sometimes with surprising speed. The decriminalization of homosexuality paved the way for a broader liberalization in how sexuality and relationships are understood. The 2015 referendum legalizing same-sex marriage stands as a watershed moment, signaling not just legislative change but a profound shift in cultural values. Where once the mere discussion of sexuality was shrouded in stigma and silence, today there is a growing openness in Irish society, fueled in part by activism, new media, and the voices of younger generations. Social media has played an outsized role here, amplifying both progressive movements and those who challenge lingering prejudice. Even so, the legacy of stigma has not disappeared overnight. Many still grapple with the weight of cultural expectations, and debates about respectability, gender, and the family continue. The scars of institutionalization, visible in the stories of those who experience shame, exclusion, or confinement in the name of morality, remain a subject of national reflection. But the direction is clear. Ireland's understanding of intimacy, family, and selfhood is broader and more inclusive than at any previous point in its history. Underlying much of this transformation is Ireland's evolving relationship with the wider world, especially Europe. The decision to join the European communities in 1973 proved transformative, setting the country on a new trajectory. Membership in what would become the European Union brought not only economic benefits, but also a profound shift in social policy and political mindset. The influence of the European Union is evident in many aspects of Irish life, from new protections for minority and women's rights to the embrace of more open social attitudes. Scholars reviewing the past half-century describe the impact as rapid and profound, noting that European Union membership provided both the framework and the impetus for reforms that might otherwise have taken far longer to achieve. Ireland's integration into Europe has also meant a more international outlook, both politically and culturally. Where the country once looked inward, focused on its own post-colonial challenges and the tensions of partition, it now plays an active role in European and global affairs. Successive governments have engaged with European Union partners on issues from trade to human rights, while Irish citizens have benefited from opportunities to travel, study, and work across the continent. This openness has fostered increased equality and participation in international life, helping Ireland shed some of its historical insularity. Yet, as with every transformation, new challenges have arisen. The relationship with Europe is not without its tensions. Recent years have brought fresh complexities, particularly in the aftermath of Brexit, which has tested political and economic ties and raised difficult questions about the border with Northern Ireland. These challenges underscore the fact that Ireland's place in the world is still evolving, as are the policies and attitudes that shape its society. Within Ireland itself, the pace of change has sometimes outstripped the capacity of institutions to adapt. Ongoing challenges include questions of sustainability, governance, and participation in civil society. Economic growth and increased diversity have not erased persistent issues of inequality, poverty, and underinvestment in certain sectors. In particular, the experience of newcomers, while often positive, can still be marked by barriers to full participation, whether in employment, education, or community life. Demographic shifts add another layer of complexity. Ireland's population is rapidly aging, with significant implications for health and social care. Policymakers are beginning to grapple with how to provide for a growing number of older citizens, even as demands on housing, education, and social services continue to rise. This demographic transition poses both risks and opportunities. An aging society may strain resources, but it can also benefit from the wisdom and experience of older generations, especially if intergenerational solidarity is nurtured. The civic and political context is similarly dynamic. Ireland has a strong tradition of civil society engagement, but the forms this takes are changing. Social innovation, new ways of addressing community needs, and fostering collective action has become both a necessity and a goal. Challenges remain, of course. Not everyone feels empowered to participate, and there are persistent gaps between policy aspirations and lived realities. Still, there is evidence of resilience and creativity as communities experiment with new models of inclusion and problem-solving. Perhaps the most profound question facing modern Ireland is how to negotiate its sense of identity in an era of rapid change. The era of the Celtic Tiger brought economic growth and a new confidence, but it also sparked anxiety about the loss of tradition, the pressures of globalization, and the meaning of Irishness itself. The arrival of new populations, the adoption of unfamiliar customs, and the shifting patterns of consumption and work have all left their mark. Yet, surveys and social research suggest that most Irish people view diversity as a strength, and there is a growing willingness to embrace a broader, more layered understanding of what it means to be Irish. This new pluralism is not without its tensions. Some worry about the erosion of traditional values or the challenges of integration. Others see opportunity in the blending of cultures and experiences. For many, the answer lies in striking a balance, honoring the past while making room for the present, preserving what is distinctively Irish while welcoming what is new. The road ahead is neither simple nor predetermined. Ireland's experience suggests that social change is seldom linear. It unfolds in fits and starts, shaped by global forces and local choices, by policy, and by the quiet decisions made in homes and communities. The story of modern Ireland is one of resilience and adaptation, of finding connection amid diversity, and of reimagining identity for a new era. If the past is any guide, the future will be shaped by both continuity and transformation. Ireland's capacity to embrace diversity, address persistent inequalities, and foster a sense of belonging for all who call it home will determine not just its prosperity, but its spirit. The journey is ongoing, a testament to the country's ability to change, to question, and to imagine new possibilities for itself and for those who will shape its next chapter.